A den of serpents dressed in alabaster finery and aurum accoutrements. That's what I have to say about Druma. The prophets of Kalistrade take the worst aspects of an elite social club and a religion, then weave them together using words from someone who's been dead for thousands of years. They dwell inside some of the most protected mansions in the world, and legions of Golarian's most elite soldiers await their commands. They control nations on the other side of the continent, and the rulers of those places don't even realize it. They earned their nation's independence by calling in debts from ages past. God help us if they ever decide to call in those debts again. Do I miss the routine backstabbing, social subterfuge, and constant need for paranoia? No. Do I miss being part of it all?
Of course!
Let's talk about the prophets of Kalistrade, otherwise known as the Kalistocrats. The history of their home country, Druma, goes back more than 11,000 years, but for now, let's focus on the origins of the prophets themselves. It all started with a family of gilders and bookbinders, specifically the craftsman Kalistrade, who after a bad case of food poisoning was left bedridden and delirious for weeks. What little time he was awake was spent scribbling down incomprehensible notes. When he finally recovered, he was like a man reborn, with a singular focus. He gathered his notes and quickly sold his inheritance, effectively cutting all ties keeping him in Druma. It should come as no surprise then that the very next thing he did was leave, not to be seen again for 8 long years. When he finally returned, he was decked out in fine clothing, pockets filled to bursting with coin. Everyone had to know, where'd you get the money, man? But all he would talk about was his fancy new diet and how he started doing yoga. He turned down all his suitors, preaching his personal brand of abstinence that went so far as to include wearing long gloves to protect himself from the filth that is other people. Kalistrade might simply have been forgotten as a rich eccentric if not for the cult of personality that formed around him. Within a decade, dozens had joined him and he began to share the secrets to his success as a merchant. Following his advice and working together as a network, each new member enjoyed the benefits of friends in high places, securing them better deals than they could have achieved on their own. The cult steadily grew for a while until Kalistrade disappeared and was presumed dead. That could have been the end of this story, but his disciples weren't prepared to let it go. They set about collecting Kalistrade's many letters, journals, warnings, and strictures in an attempt to compile them into a canon text. The resulting arguments over this text split the devotees into various factions, and it would not be until 150 years later, after uncovering Kalistrade's final resting place and communing with his spirit, that the factions would be united once more, since their most burning questions and debates had been resolved by the trip to the tomb. Kalistrade talked a lot in his writings about the idea of purity. It was reflected in everything he said and did. His pure white clothing, the purity of his diet and personal hygiene. Man was obsessed with the idea that the only goal worth pursuing in life was this purity, and that included obtaining as much wealth as possible. More than 1,000 years later, a group of 14 disgustingly rich Kalistocrats, who supplied war materials to the dwarfs of the Five Kings Mountains, gathered in secret to create a joint trust, dubbed the Promise of Kalistrade, to raise money for political influence. Deciding to play the long game, they would spend centuries and entire fortunes acquiring land, assets, and loaning out large sums of money till half the world was in debt to them. In particular, the Kalistocrats financed the War of the Five Kings, purchasing war debts from each of the kingdoms. After 750 years of fighting, the dwarfs were exhausted from countless battles, ceasefires, and collateral damage. One week in autumn, all fighting suddenly ceased when each of the Five Kings received the same dire letter from their shadowy creditors. The message was simple: repay what is owed. The kingdoms responded with indignation and threats, but the Kalistocrats had already assembled militias and the services of the Mercenary League to make sure that the dwarfs paid their debt. The Kalistocrats called the Five Kings to the dwarf city of Curse and offered them an alternative deal. The dwarfs would end their fighting permanently, and Druma would be granted independence. In exchange, most of the debt would be wiped clean. Known as the Curse Accord, this treaty established Druma as a sovereign nation, recognised by the Dwarf Kingdoms and Taldor alike, with Curse serving as its new capital. Soon after, a government was formed, and the white-garbed Kalistocrats were quick to get in at the ground level. For a while, the Kalistocrats were heroes, and enjoyed several years of can-do-nothing-wrong prestige, before they came under increasing scrutiny by the working class for making the gap between rich and poor wider than ever. Week-long burning glove riots ravaged Curse, forcing the Kalistocrats to make efforts to improve the lives of the lower classes and distance themselves from the fledgling government, known today as the resplendent bureaucracy. The truth is, however, the bureaucracy is at best a deterrent against giving the prophets complete control, thanks to strict caps on the payrolls of government officials, and at worst, a puppet government, controlled in secret by the cult, who has ties to at least one high-ranking official in almost every country in the world. Even Druma's official leader, the Intercessor, is hand-picked by the High Prophet, the Kalistocrat's spiritual leader. That position currently belongs to High Prophet Keldor, an ambitious man renowned for his mastery of economics and social engineering. Recently, his attention has been focused on the acquisition of foreign land and expanding the group's military might. Thanks to a small print clause in the Cursor Code, he, like all High Prophets, has the power to retract the laws of Druma and override their decisions, but this is rarely used due to the potential backlash. Little is known about his life before his appointment other than he possessed powerful divination abilities worthy of his title, and these powers have allowed Keldor to amass more wealth than any other prophet. Like his predecessors, Keldor spends most of his time in the Everlasting Palace, which sits atop a private artificial island near Curse. A host of elite Mercenary League veterans protect the High Prophet, who uses magic to communicate beyond the palace. Okay, now that we've got the stuffy politics out of the way, let's actually take a closer look at what it means to be a prophet of Kalistrade. Although referred to as a religious cult, Kalistocrats ultimately answer to no one but themselves. They have no god pulling their strings or punishing them for their sins. Their salvation lies elsewhere. A typical day for a prophet starts with a bath and a workout. Afterwards they get dressed, refusing any help until they've covered their body with the first layer. Throughout the day they will meditate to clear their thoughts, and their meals tend to be simple and light. The only exception is when they are entertaining guests. Kalistocrats put business first, and impressing a potential client with a feast is more important than keeping their calories down. Many of the prophet's daily rituals and superstitions have been adopted by the greater population of Druma, and businesses try their best to accommodate their unique needs, such as restaurants having a prophet-friendly menu, and nobody would dare feed a cow a potato. Apparently that's a thing. It's worth noting that given their whole body purity thing, they also can't stand tattoos. Well, normal tattoos. Crazy elaborate ones, inked with liquid gold on the other hand, that might get a pass.
I love gold!
One of the most distinguishing features of a Kalistocrat is their white robes. There isn't actually a set uniform for them, it's more like a dress code for life. It generally has to be white and cover a lot of skin for the sake of their no touching rule. It's encouraged for them to flaunt their wealth through their clothing, jewellery and other personal effects, and they'll always be the first to point out how fabulous they look. Prophets might not have an official deity, but there's no rules against them choosing one. Abadar is a common pick, him being the god of wealth and trade, so it's a natural fit. Alternatively, the more desperate to rise to the ranks of the order might take their chances making a deal with Asmodeus or even Mammon, but as you can imagine, that usually doesn't go very well. Early on in their history, several leading Kalistocrats pushed to adopt a symbol behind which they could unify their faith. This led to the creation of the Golden Focus, a combination of two circles, one inside the radius of the other, and a triangle overlapping the edges. Alright, now for the sake of not being here all day, here's a quickfire round for all of their bizarre rules and taboos. Personal space. If you're any closer than a meter, you need to get the F out of their face before they ask to speak to your manager. Physical contact. Second verse, same as the first. Hands off the merchandise. You can't afford it. Unless you can, in which case I'll consider it. That is actually how that works. Charity. Altruism has no place in the teachings of Kalistrade. There used to be a faction of them called the Golden Solidarity who were big into that. And guess where they are? Dead. That's where. So slap that biscuit out of that orphan's mouth. He didn't pay for it. Diet. The prophets are notoriously picky eaters. The food needs to be high quality, and don't you dare try to feed them anything meant for the animal's young, such as raw milk, egg or honey. Unless you cook or process it, in which case they're fine with it, because like I said, very picky. Wastefulness. This applies to everything. Food, money, resources. Even at their most excessive, a prophet spends money to make money. And lastly, everything else. Seriously, there's too many. And a lot of them are so specific, like don't sign a contract while facing east, or only trim your nails during certain phases of the moon. Your average prophet isn't even going to attempt to remember these. However, they do serve a purpose in allowing them to embarrass their Kalistocrat rivals by bringing up obscure rules at exactly the right moment. If anyone listening to this hasn't played the original Nia, which I'm just going to assume is most of you, there's an entire civilization called Facade that's like this, and they have like 10 billion rules. It's so stupid that it circles all the way back around to being cool. The prophets aren't called that for nothing. Among Kalistrade's many insane ramblings was a number of prophecies, all bound together in a large text assembled by his followers following his death. This text is known as the Prophecies of Kalistrade, and while it's impossible to verify them in the same way you would the writings of another religion, where you can just talk to your god, its practitioners put a lot of faith into the words of its author. Plus it helps that half of it is a get-rich-quick book that actually works. The full version of the book is several hundred pages long, with about 65% of it being Kalistrade's own words. These texts are largely taken from his dream journals, travel logs, and speeches compiled before his death, while the rest consist of notes, clarifications, and various other amendments by leading Kalistocrats in the centuries that followed. These prophecies proved to be surprisingly accurate. In fact, the clues they offered towards the future allowed many studious Kalistocrats to make massive advancements in their rank and personal wealth. Or at least, used to. None of them have come true ever since Eridan's death, just like all other forms of prophecy. Of course, the Kalistocrats deny this. However, as useful as this book is, it offers no answers to the burning questions of who to worship, how the world came to be, how it will end. It's a guide to individual enlightenment, rather than an extra-planar treaty. And even though the book is believed to be an autobiography of Kalistrade's life during the 8 years he was travelling, the protagonist of these stories is unnamed, and the locations in some cases are places that Kalistrade shouldn't have been able to even reach, putting a lot of what's in the book into doubt as to whether it's even meant to be taken literally. By far the book's biggest omission is the afterlife. Upon death, a soul normally travels to the River of Souls to be judged by Pharasma. The Kalistocrats spend all this time building up a Scrooge McDuck-style mountain of gold, and yet the Lady of Graves doesn't care how rich you are, so what's the point? Well, the answer to that is one of the faith's most closely guarded secrets, shared only with those that prove themselves. Those who truly follow the prophecies are never judged. All of the regiments, dieting, and rules acts as a lifelong purification, leading up to self-mummification. Yeah, you heard me right. Self. Over the course of their life, a Kalistocrat will slowly ingest trace amounts of precious metal and bind it to themselves through Kalistrade's teachings. When they hear Pharasma come a-knocking, they pump their bodies full of specially treated molten metals made from their vast fortune, until their blood runs gold. The process, shockingly, kills you. But here's the important part. Your soul doesn't leave your body. Instead, the ritual allows the soul to create its own eternal mindscape, a customized afterlife, limited only by how much gold you hooked into your veins. And if that wasn't gnarly enough, others can voluntarily bind themselves to your mummified remains, such as family or servants, to serve or keep company for all eternity, which, if John Paul Sartre knew what he was talking about, is something they're liable to regret. These golden mummies are hidden in different mausoleums throughout Druma, and each one is worth more than its weight in gold. It's no wonder this is such a well-kept secret. Grave robbers would be breaking into them every other night otherwise. Not to mention the Pharasman Church would throw a fit. The weird thing is, Pharasma must know about this. I mean, she's only a bloody god. But she didn't send her people the memo, so, for whatever reason, maybe she just doesn't care. Now, this ritual is not without its risks. Then again, they're going to die anyway, so I can see why they take their chances. When a Kalistocrat builds their idealized paradise, the likelihood of success depends on how strongly they followed the teachings, and how much wealth was sacrificed to serve as an occult anchor for their will. It's often the case that you won't know for weeks whether it was successful, and if it wasn't, the mindscapes of those prophets begin to collapse. The lucky ones can't hold on any longer, and they end up in the River of Souls just like anybody else. But others simply won't let go. Their minds rejoin their golden veined bodies as undead. Unable to accept their failure, they resolve to try again, this time with even more wealth. Breaking out of their mausoleums, they hunt down the rich and steal their possessions, or worse, they dismantle the bodies of other mummified Kalistocrats for scrap, sending the mindscapes of their one-time allies hurtling into the astral plane to be torn apart by predators or astral weather. And that's everything for the Prophets of Kalistrade. If you're interested in learning more, then I highly recommend picking up the book Druma, Prophet and Prophecies, which was my main source of information for this episode. As always, see you next time.